March 23, 1945, 2,100 hours. Western bank of the Rhine River, near Wesel, Germany. The binocular shook imperceptibly as Oberst Wilhelm Steinberg scanned the darkening waters of the Rhine, recording observations in his field notebook, notes that would later be found among captured German documents at Army Group headquarters. The Americans have reached our sacred river, but they cannot cross. No army has ever forced the Rhine against determined German resistance without bridges. Through the gathering dusk, he had just observed something that reinforced 3 years of Wehrmacht defensive doctrine. Artillery flashes illuminated the western bank, thousands of guns preparing for what German commanders expected would be a traditional river assault, requiring days of preparation, fixed bridging operations, and vulnerable crossing points that their 88mm guns could systematically destroy. In Germany, the Rhine had protected the nation for 2 millennia. Even now, with the Reich crumbling from east and west, military engineers assured commanders that the river's 1,300-foot width and swift currents made it impossible to cross without lengthy engineering preparations. 2,000 men of the 51st Highland Division's 7th Battalion Black Watch prepared to enter the water, not in vulnerable assault boats shuttling back and forth under fire, nor waiting for engineers to complete pontoon bridges under artillery bombardment, but aboard vehicles that German intelligence had catastrophically failed to assess. The strange boat-shaped trucks designated DUKWs had been observed in Normandy and Italy, but Wehrmacht analysts dismissed them as specialized landing craft for beach operations, irrelevant to river warfare. The mathematics of the Rhine defense were about to be shattered not by superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but by American industrial ingenuity that German defenders never imagined could be brought to bear on their last natural fortress, a systematic failure of intelligence that would transform Germany's uncrossable moat into a highway for Allied armor. The collapse had begun months earlier in German intelligence assessments. Oberst G. A. Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, would later testify to Allied interrogators about the Wehrmacht's fundamental misreading of American amphibious capabilities. Intelligence reports from Sicily, Salerno, and Normandy had described Schwimmwagen, swimming trucks, but German analysts filed these among the curiosities of American excess, like ice cream ships and Coca-Cola battalions. Among the defenders was Major Hans Georg Model, son of Field Marshal Walter Model, serving with the 1st Parachute Army. His personal diary, captured after his surrender in April 1945, would provide historians with insight into German assumptions about Rhine defense. The Wehrmacht's most experienced officers, men who had studied river crossings from the Dnieper to the Seine, believed they understood the immutable laws of amphibious assault. Attackers needed overwhelming artillery superiority, specialized bridging equipment, and most critically, time to establish crossing points that defenders could target. But the first real revelation of German ignorance came in their own assessment documents discovered at captured headquarters. Hauptmann Friedrich Wenzel, an intelligence officer with the 15th Army, had compiled reports on Allied equipment that mentioned the DUKW exactly 3 times in 6 months of documentation. Each reference dismissed them as coastal operations equipment with no relevance to river warfare. The reports estimated American forces possess perhaps 50 to 100 such vehicles in the entire European theater. The reality was staggering. By March 1945, over 2,000 DUKWs operated in the European theater. The U.S. Army had organized them into specialized amphibious truck companies, each with 50 vehicles and trained crews. These units had practiced river crossing operations since Normandy, developing doctrine that German intelligence never detected. The British had received 2,000 DUKWs through Lend-Lease, adding their own operational innovations. Canadian forces operated 800 units with specialized cold weather modifications. The DUKW's development represented American problem-solving at its most efficient. In April 1942, when a Coast Guard patrol boat ran aground on a sandbar near Provincetown, Massachusetts, conventional trucks couldn't reach it through surf and sand. This minor incident sparked a revolution in amphibious warfare that would ultimately help destroy the Third Reich. Palmer Coslet Putnam, working for the Office of Scientific Research and Development, partnered with yacht designer Rod Stevens Jr. and engineer Dennis Pulston to envision a truck that could transition seamlessly from water to land. When Ford Motor Company declined the project, claiming it was impossible to complete in the required time frame, General Motors Corporation accepted the challenge on April 23, 1942. The engineering team at GMC's Yellow Truck and Coach Manufacturing Company in Pontiac, Michigan, worked around the clock. By June 2, 1942, just 38 days later, the first prototype rolled out. The vehicle combined a standard GMC CCKW2 and a half-ton truck chassis with a watertight hull designed by Sparkman and Stevens Yacht Architects. The designation DUKW came from GMC's nomenclature system. D 1942 design year. U utility. K all-wheel drive. W dual rear axles. The secret to the DUKW's versatility lay in several innovations. Frank Spear from GMC's engineering team developed the Central Tire Inflation System (CTIS), the world's first, allowing drivers to adjust tire pressure while moving. At 10 to 12 pounds per square inch, the tires spread wide for sand and mud traction. At 40 to 45 psi, they provided highway efficiency. A 25 inches propeller driven through a transfer case from the main transmission provided water propulsion at 5.5 knots, while a rudder linked to the steering wheel allowed seamless transition from water to land navigation. Major General Jacob Devers observed the first demonstration in June 1942 and immediately ordered mass production. The initial contract called for 2,000 units. By war's end, GMC had manufactured 21,147 DUKWs at the unprecedented pace of 525 per month during peak production, each costing $10,750, roughly the price of 7 Jeeps, but with capabilities that would prove priceless. These mobile reserves consisted of 47 Panzer Corps with approximately 150 operational armored vehicles, tanks, assault guns, and tank destroyers combined, to cover a front of nearly 200 miles. But the most critical German failure was conceptual. Wehrmacht doctrine, refined through 5 years of war, understood river crossings as sequential operations, suppress defenders with artillery, send infantry across in assault boats, establish small bridgeheads, begin bridge construction under fire, reinforce gradually as bridges were completed, then finally send armor across. Each phase provided defenders opportunities to concentrate fire and launch counterattacks. Unknown to German intelligence, the Allied forces had assembled the largest concentration of amphibious vehicles in history along the Rhine's western bank. By March 22, 1945, hundreds of DUKWs had been positioned in concealed areas within 5 miles of planned crossing points. Each vehicle had been waterproofed, mechanically inspected, and loaded with specific cargo manifests to maintain water stability. Lieutenant Colonel William Thompson, commanding the 458th Amphibious Truck Company, recalled the meticulous preparation. "We knew this wasn't Normandy with tides and beach obstacles. The Rhine was about current, about exit points, about coordinating with artillery so we didn't get hit by our own shells. We practiced on the Meuse River for 2 weeks, learning how the DUKWs handled in fast current." The vehicles themselves had been modified based on 3 years of combat experience. Armor plating protected drivers and vital mechanical components. Ring mounts for .50 caliber machine guns provided self-defense capability. Most critically, specialized bilge pumps could handle water intake from small arms fire, allowing DUKWs to continue operating even when their hulls were perforated. Captain James Mitchell of the 819th Amphibious Truck Company described the final briefing. "They told us we were going to do something nobody had ever done. Use DUKWs as the primary assault vehicle for a major river crossing. Not support vessels, not supply carriers after the bridges were built, but the actual spearhead. Each DUK would carry a full rifle squad with equipment, cross the Rhine, drive up the eastern bank, and deposit troops directly into combat positions." The British forces had their own amphibious assets. The 79th Armored Division under Major General Percy Hobart had brought 600 LV-4 Buffalo amphibious tractors, each capable of carrying 30 men. These would work alongside the American DUKWs in what would become the largest amphibious river crossing in military history. But it was the DUKWs, with their ability to seamlessly transition from water to land, that would prove most devastating to German assumptions. At 1,700 hours on March 23, 1945, the greatest artillery bombardment of the Rhine campaign commenced. Over 4,000 Allied guns, from 25-pounders to 240 mm howitzers, unleashed a 4-hour barrage that seemed to turn the air itself into a solid wall of steel and explosive. German observers reported that the eastern bank appeared to be boiling under the impact of thousands of shells per minute. Gerrit Hinrichsmüller, manning an observation post near Wesel, attempted to count the muzzle flashes across the river. I stopped at 500. It was like looking at a solid line of flame stretching north and south as far as I could see. The noise was beyond description, not individual explosions, but one continuous roar that made thought impossible. Under cover of this bombardment and darkness, the 1st DUKWs entered the Rhine at 2,100 hours. The 51st Highland Division led the assault, with the 7th Battalion Black Watch, loaded into DUKWs operated by American crews. Each vehicle carried 12 fully equipped soldiers plus its 2-man crew. Navigation lights, shielded to be visible only from behind, marked entry and exit points on both banks. Sergeant Robert McPherson of the Black Watch described the crossing. We rolled down the bank and suddenly we were floating. The American driver just kept driving like we were still on land, except now water was rushing past. The engine noise was terrific, and we could hear German shells hitting the water around us, but we couldn't see anything in the darkness and smoke. The current proved stronger than expected, 8 to 10 knots in the main channel. DUKWs launched upstream of their intended landing points, their drivers calculating drift like navigators plotting aircraft courses in crosswinds. Some vehicles were swept hundreds of yards downstream, but their ability to drive up any reasonably sloped bank meant they could exit the river wherever they found themselves. By 2200 hours, the first wave was across. German defenders, expecting to hear assault boats returning for second waves, instead heard only the continued roar of artillery. The DUKWs had driven straight up the eastern banks and disappeared into the darkness, their passengers already engaging German positions from unexpected directions. As dawn broke on March 24, German commanders began receiving reports that defied explanation. Enemy troops were appearing miles inland from crossing points in battalion strength with heavy weapons and supplies. The expected pattern of gradually expanding bridgeheads hadn't materialized. Instead, Allied forces seemed to be everywhere at once. Hauptmann Karl Richet, commanding a battery of 88mm guns positioned to cover the crossing site at Ries, reported to divisional headquarters. "Enemy armor is behind us." Repeat, "Enemy armor is behind our position." How did they get across? "All bridges are destroyed. We have seen no pontoon construction." What the Reich had encountered weren't tanks but DUKWs carrying infantry support weapons, mortars, machine guns and anti-tank guns, that had driven directly from the Rhine to positions 3 miles inland. The vehicle's amphibious capability allowed them to bypass German strongpoints positioned to defend obvious routes from the riverbank. The scale of the operation became apparent as morning fog lifted. Hundreds of DUKWs were shuttling across the Rhine in continuous streams. Unlike assault boats that required engineer crews and were limited to perpendicular crossings at prepared sites, DUKWs could enter and exit the river anywhere banks permitted. German artillery observers reported swimming trucks crossing at dozens of points along a 22-mile front. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann, operations officer for the 185th Division, recorded in his war diary, "The enemy has deployed a type of amphibious vehicle in numbers we never anticipated. Our defensive plan assumed 6 to 8 crossing points we could target with concentrated fire. Instead, they are crossing everywhere. Our guns cannot engage so many targets simultaneously."